Could the United States have used psychic soldiers to fight hidden wars? Could human minds have been trained as weapons, reaching beyond walls, borders, and battle lines? It sounds impossible until you learn this. For more than 20 years, real U.S. military and intelligence units quietly funded programs to test remote viewing, the claimed ability to see distant targets using only the mind. These were not rumors on the fringe. They were projects with budgets, code names, and classified reports. Buried inside the machinery of the Cold War, picture a dim room on a secure base. No windows, a single metal table. A soldier sits alone, a pencil shaking in his hand. He has never seen the place he is being asked to describe. He has no map, no photograph, no satellite feed, only a number written on a scrap of paper. Minutes later, on the page in front of him, shapes begin to emerge. A long structure, curved towers, water nearby. Weeks later, reconnaissance planes confirm a facility that should have been impossible for him to know. Officially, these experiments were limited, inconclusive, terminated. Unofficially, there is a gap, a missing chapter. And within that gap lies one question no document has ever answered directly. Were psychic soldiers only tested in laboratories? Or were they quietly deployed into the dark edges of war? The war for the invisible battlefield hath first signs never arrived with alarms or sirens. They came quietly, threaded through intelligence briefings where silence carried more weight than the words spoken. In the early years of the Cold War, American analysts saw patterns emerging inside. Soviet research reports strange lines about bioenergetics, psychotronics, and anomalous human perception. Most dismissed them as propaganda or badly translated science. But a few officers, the ones trained to see threats before they were fully formed, felt something deeper beneath the jargon. A possibility so far outside conventional warfare that even naming it felt dangerous. By 1972, that possibility could no longer be ignored. Reports surfaced of Soviet units allegedly training individuals to influence objects, detect concealed installations, and gather intelligence from distances no human eye could span. No solid proof, no reliable sources, only fragments, yet fragments with enough consistency to make the United States uneasy. Because if even one of those claims proved true, then America was already behind in a war it didn't understand. Inside a secure building at Fort Meade, a small group of officers gathered around a long conference table. Windows remained sealed. Phones were confiscated. A single folder marked with a red stripe lay in the center, its edges worn from too many hands passing it too quickly. The officer leading the meeting didn't dramatize. He simply opened the folder, slid a document forward, and told them what no one expected to hear, that the Soviets might be investing millions in psychic research for military use. The room stayed still. No one laughed. One of the analysts, young but already hardened by years of threat assessments, spoke first. His voice carried the tension of someone forced to consider what he'd always believed impossible. He said the risk wasn't that psychic warfare existed. The risk was that the Soviets believed it could. In military strategy, belief alone can become a weapon. From that moment, the idea stopped being fringe. It became a question of national survival. Weeks later, another briefing was held. This one smaller and deeper in the facility. Only 5 people were cleared to attend. They reviewed decades-old cases incidents where soldiers under extreme stress reported sightings, sensations, or knowledge they should not have possessed. Not supernatural stories. Behavioral anomalies that psychologists never fully explained. Under normal conditions, such incidents were filed away and forgotten. But now, in the new context, those forgotten details suddenly carried weight. One report described a pilot who seconds before his instruments detected it felt the presence of an unseen missile battery hidden in a valley far below. Another described a captured intelligence officer who perceived movements outside his cell hours before guards approached. None of it was conclusive. None of it proved anything. Yet each account pressed the same unsettling question forward. What if the human mind, pushed to its limits by war, occasionally reached beyond itself? The officers didn't agree on interpretation, but they agreed on one thing. They couldn't risk assuming the Soviets were wrong. The proposal that followed didn't ask for an army. It asked for a room, a handful of subjects, a small budget, a chance to test the possibility that perception could stretch beyond physical boundaries. It wasn't about belief. It was about understanding what the enemy might already be exploring. One evening, long after the sun had fallen behind the base perimeter, the final decision was made. A senior intelligence director signed the authorization quietly, as though the weight of the act might shift if too many people witnessed it. He paused, pen still in hand, as if questioning his own judgment. But in the end, he knew the truth. The United States could not allow any battlefield, visible or invisible, to be dominated by a rival power. The signature dried. The program began. But the moment the ink touched the paper, new tensions emerged. How do you study a phenomenon most scientists dismiss? How do you train soldiers to use abilities few acknowledge? The very nature of the program demanded secrecy so tight that even within the intelligence community, many believed the early efforts were nothing more than rumor. The first volunteers arrived in unmarked cars. They weren't told what they were part of. They signed non-disclosure agreements without full context, trusting only the authority of the uniforms present. Some were chosen for their intuition, some for unusual test results, some simply because they had nowhere else to go and saw the program as a chance to stay useful. All walked into a world where normal logic no longer fully applied. They trained in silence. They observed details that seemed irrelevant. They learned to clear their minds, then fill them with images that didn't belong to them. Exercises grew stranger with each session. A number on a card, a sealed envelope, a distant location none of them had seen. The goal was simple in wording, but nearly impossible in practice. Describe what lies far away. Without leaving the room, most sessions were failures. Pages filled with scribbles, guesses, distortions. But one day, everything shifted. A subject quiet, detached, nearly invisible in the group placed his hand over a target envelope. He breathed once, deeply. Then he began to draw. At first, the lines meant nothing. But as minutes passed, a structure emerged: arched supports, long corridors, water on one side, mountains on the other. Observers exchanged uneasy glances. The envelope, when opened, contained coordinates, not images, not descriptions, just coordinates of a site on the other side of the world. Days later, reconnaissance confirmed the structure. The resemblance to the subject's drawing wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to unsettle even the skeptics. That was the moment the officers realized something dangerous. Even one accurate session meant the program could not be dismissed. Still, doubt remained. Was it coincidence? Was it subconscious recall? Was the subject interpreting vague impressions into shapes that merely resembled the truth? As those questions circled, the analysts noticed something more troubling. The subject himself seemed shaken by what he had done. He avoided eye contact. He asked to leave early. He reported cold sweats at night. Not fear of the program, fear of what he had seen. His reactions raised a new concern. If remote perception was real, even in rare moments, what did it demand of the human mind? What unseen strain did it place on the one doing the viewing? The program expanded, but carefully. No one wanted a psychological collapse on their record. Yet every small success fed curiosity. Every unexplained detail pushed the officers forward. Files thickened. Redactions multiplied. A sense of urgency grew, driven by an invisible opponent on the far side of the world. And then, without warning, a classified message arrived from another intelligence office, a request for assistance. On an active operation, no details, no mission name, only a timeline and an urgent directive that seemed to assume the program had capabilities it had never openly claimed. The officers hesitated. They were not ready. The subjects were not prepared. The data was inconsistent. Yet refusing would risk revealing the program existed, and that was a danger no one could accept. That night, in the same dim room where the first experiment had taken place, the lead subject sat alone once more. His hands trembled. The target he was asked to perceive was not a building, not coordinates. It was something far more human, something that, if real, meant the program had stepped over an invisible threshold into something none of them fully understood. He closed his eyes. The pencil touched the paper, and as the first uncertain lines formed, a single truth settled over the room. Whatever he saw in that moment would change the direction of the program forever. But what he drew that night, what he claimed to perceive, and what the operation ultimately uncovered, those answers were locked away, and the next chapter of this hidden war began in silence. Inside the psychic units, files, experiments, and unofficial rules, the man who walked into the room the next morning did not look like someone capable of unraveling secrets hidden behind borders and battle lines. He looked exhausted, hollow. His eyes carried the weight of a night filled with images he didn't fully understand. The officers didn't speak at first. They watched him sit, steady his hands, and avoid the sketch he made hours earlier. The drawing lay sealed in an envelope on the table, untouched since the session ended. No one wanted to open it yet, not until they could anchor themselves in something solid. Outside the room, the hallway hummed with the quiet rhythm of a facility that didn't officially exist. Analysts moved in controlled patterns, carrying files that held fragments of a program still too fragile to expose. Inside the program, people had begun whispering. Some claimed the subjects were unstable. Others believed the accuracy of recent sketches meant the unit was sitting on a discovery, with implications bigger than anyone wanted to admit. Rumors traveled faster than authorization memos. When the envelope was opened at last, the room shifted. The subject's drawing didn't show structures, machines, or terrain. It showed a person, a man wearing a uniform from a region locked in a covert conflict, a man whose face the subject had never seen, a man who, according to intelligence files, had disappeared 12 days earlier. The accuracy was too sharp to ignore. The subject had sketched a scar on the man's cheek, the fold of a collar, even the angle of how he appeared to be sitting. The officers recognized the details instantly because they had been studying the missing operative since the moment he vanished. Yet the drawing showed something the files did not. The man was not alone. Behind him, barely visible in the lines, was the shape of another figure, blurred, undefined, almost like a shadow standing where no shadow should be. The subject said he didn't remember drawing that part, and that troubled everyone. When the team compared the drawing with the limited intelligence they had, the room filled with a tension that tasted like fear. The last known location of the missing operative aligned suspiciously well with a vague sense of space in the sketch. But there was more. A communication, intercepted only hours after the viewing session, hinted that the operative might still be alive and held inside a structure no surveillance plane had been able to locate. For the first time, the question no one had dared ask became impossible to avoid. Were these sessions nothing more than chance? Or was the program glimpsing places it had no physical way of reaching? The subject refused to undergo another session that day. His pulse had spiked, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He said the room felt wrong, as if the air itself remembered something from the night before. The officers let him go. They wanted clarity, not collapse. In his absence, the program's unofficial guidelines began to form. No pushing subjects beyond their limits. No more than one deep viewing session per day. Every sketch must be reviewed by at least 3 analysts before being logged. And above all, no interpretation was to be treated as fact without external confirmation. But even with rules, the program evolved in ways no one expected. New volunteers arrived from different branches. Some came willingly, believing their intuition gave them an advantage others didn't possess. Others arrived by recommendation, having displayed subtle abilities in previous assignments, moments of uncanny awareness, sudden insights, or instincts that often proved right when they shouldn't have. Among them was a woman who had served overseas and carried an unspoken intensity in her posture. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't waste words. When asked why she joined, she answered with something that left the room silent. She said she had once sensed danger seconds before her convoy was attacked. She couldn't explain it, but she had lived because of it. She wanted to understand what that moment truly was, not chance, not luck, but something else. Her first session changed everything. With only a target number to focus on, she described a metallic chamber deep underground. She spoke calmly, as if reading from a memory rather than imagination. She noted the smell of oil, the sound of dripping water echoing through the space, the presence of machinery that didn't appear in any available intelligence. When she finished, analysts exchanged uneasy glances. Satellite images from the region showed nothing like what she described, but seismic data from the area buried in old geological surveys hinted at hollow structures beneath the surface. When her notes were cross-referenced with a separate remote viewer's session from months earlier, a chilling overlap appeared. Both described an underground environment. Both mentioned metal supports shaped in a similar way. Both sensed a human presence far below ground. The officers didn't say it out loud, but everyone in the room knew what they were thinking. 2 sessions, months apart, conducted by people who had never met, were describing the same hidden place. And if that place existed, it meant the psychic program was no longer contained to theoretical exercises. It was brushing against operations unfolding in real time. The whispers inside the unit grew more intense. Some believed the viewers were tapping into something beyond perception, something dangerous. Others believed the viewers were simply connecting dots subconsciously, absorbing scattered intelligence and reconstructing it in unfamiliar ways. But a small, quiet group began to entertain a possibility that felt both thrilling and terrifying. What if the mind could indeed serve as a reconnaissance tool? That possibility grew stronger when a new report arrived from overseas. A reconnaissance drone detected heat signatures in a remote valley, nearly identical to the placement the female subject had described. The drone could not enter the area due to anti-air defenses, but the confirmation was enough. Her session had given the team their first clue one technology could not obtain. The program's internal debates intensified. Should they push the subjects further? Should they involve them in active missions? Should they share this information with other agencies? Every decision carried risk. Every hesitation carried consequence. Late one night, while most of the base slept, the female subject returned to the viewing room alone. She placed her hand on the table, closed her eyes, and focused on the missing operative from the previous session. She wasn't assigned to do it. She wasn't authorized, but something had unsettled her since the moment she heard his story. She sensed fear not her own, but someone else's lingering like a faint echo in the back of her mind. She needed to understand it. Minutes later, her breathing changed. Her hands tensed. She whispered something barely audible. A single word. A place she had never heard of, but one the officers immediately recognized. When they checked the recording the next day, it was a location recently flagged in a classified report, a site suspected of holding foreign detainees. No viewer had ever mentioned it before. She had no reason to know the name, but she had spoken it with absolute certainty. When they questioned her, she didn't remember saying anything. She described only a feeling cold stone, flickering lights, and the sensation of being watched by something unseen. Her account matched, in unsettling detail, the blurred figure drawn behind the missing operative in the subject's earlier sketch. The officers didn't know how to process it. The unrelated sessions from the unrelated viewers, pointing toward a single location they were not cleared to investigate. Yet the evidence thin, fragile, impossible to ignore kept pushing them toward a truth that threatened the boundaries of conventional intelligence. That afternoon, a sealed message arrived from headquarters. It contained no explanation, no notes, no introduction, only a request for the program's full involvement in a developing crisis. The missing operative had resurfaced, alive, found near the outskirts of the location the viewers had described. He was unconscious, disoriented, and the first words he whispered before collapsing sent a ripple of unease through every officer. Who heard them? He said he hadn't been alone in that place. He said someone or something was watching him, and he swore he heard footsteps in a room where no one stood. Before he could say more, he lost consciousness, and the psychic unit, already standing on unsteady ground, was now pulled into a threat darker than anything they had trained for. What the operative remembered when he finally woke would decide the future of the entire program. From the laboratory to the war-zoned man who regained consciousness in the medical wing, should not have been alive. His skin was pale, his heartbeat thin, his breathing shallow. Doctors whispered about dehydration, nerve trauma, and something else they couldn't quite name. But the officers watching him from behind the glass only focused on one thing, the faint tremor in his fingers, as if he were still reaching for something he had seen in the dark. When he finally opened his eyes, he didn't ask where he was. He asked if the lights could be dimmed. The brightness, he said, felt wrong. As the room softened into shadow, he whispered that the silence in his cell had never been silent at all. There had been footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing just outside his reach. Every night, the same pattern. Every night, the same pause at the doorway. As though something were deciding whether to enter, the officers exchanged uneasy looks. They knew his cell contained no guards, no windows, no hall outside. It was a chamber carved deep into the earth, shielded from every direction. The only door was metal, locked from the outside. No one was stationed near him. Yet his account echoed what the female viewer had described only days earlier, a presence that didn't match any human movement. He closed his eyes again, pressing a hand to his forehead as if his memories were tearing their way out too fast. He spoke of another moment one just before he collapsed outside the compound. He said he felt pushed, not struck, not hit, pushed, as if something unseen wanted him out. The officers didn't know what to believe. Trauma could distort memory. Stress could invent sensations. But the timing was too sharp, the details too aligned, the fear too real. And then he mentioned something no one expected. He said he heard a whisper, a single sentence spoken in a voice he didn't recognize. The words were simple, almost mundane, but the tone made him freeze every time he thought of them. "You're not supposed to see this." The room went silent. Within hours, the psychic unit was pulled into a classified briefing. The captured operative's extraction had revealed more than anyone anticipated. The compound, where he had been held, lay near a region known for covert movements and intelligence operations. No maps listed the structure. No surveillance satellite could capture it clearly due to interference patterns. No engineer could explain. The underground facility the viewers described now seemed less like an anomaly and more like a nexus of something larger. The officers needed answers, and they needed them fast. They summoned the female viewer again, despite her exhaustion. She sat in the same chair, hands clenched together. The walls felt colder somehow, as if the room itself expected something. When given a new targetan object retrieved from the operative's cell, she hesitated. The moment she touched the sealed container, her eyes widened. She said she felt distance. Not the distance of geography, but the distance of something trying to pull away from her mind. She described a pressure, a narrowing of thoughts, as though her perception was being redirected. Her voice began to shake. She spoke of metal scraping stone, of unseen corridors stretching into darkness, and of a sensation behind her, someone watching closely. But from a place she couldn't turn to see, the officers ended the session immediately. Her pulse was too fast, her breathing too shallow. She didn't argue. She wanted to leave the room more than anything. After she walked out, the lead officer made a decision none of them were fully prepared for. It was time to test the viewers on an active mission, not because they were ready, but because failing to act meant relying solely on intelligence sources that weren't reaching deep enough. The mission involved a series of hidden supply caches used by a foreign militant group. Conventional intel placed them across a mountainous region with dozens of valleys and false trails. Finding the real cache would take weeks. Weeks the operation could not spare. Satellite imagery was blocked by weather patterns and electronic interference. Drone pods were too easily targeted. That left the unit fragile, controversial, still unproven as the only option. The first session focused on the map. A simple layout, stripped of labels. The viewers were asked to point to the most likely location. Most hesitated, but the female viewer lifted her hand without thinking. Her finger touched a narrow valley near a river bend that intelligence reports barely mentioned. She said she felt movement there. Heat, fear, something being guarded with urgency. 2 minutes later, a second viewer kept in a separate room to prevent influence touched the exact same location. The operation moved forward. A reconnaissance team approached the valley under cloud cover. Night vision flickered. Radio signals cut in and out. Something in the air felt off. But as they maneuvered through the rocks, they saw the faint outline of crates half buried under camouflage netting. The caches existed. The viewers had been right. But before the team could extract the materials, they heard something else, metal shifting under the ground. A hollow echo, as though a deeper chamber lay below. One soldier pressed his ear to the soil. He said he felt vibrations, like distant footsteps. That was the moment the mission changed. They weren't dealing with a simple storage site. They were standing on top of something bigger, something the militants clearly didn't want discovered. The team withdrew before dawn, leaving the underground structure unentered until more intel could be gathered. Their report mentioned a sensation none of them could explain, a feeling of being watched, not from the valley, but from beneath it. Back at the base, the psychic unit received the update with a silence too heavy to break. Every detail matched what their sessions had hinted at, but now they faced a new, unsettling reality. The underground environments they kept perceiving weren't separate incidents. They formed a pattern and network of hidden structures across different regions, connected by no known blueprint. And every time a viewer focused on one of them, the same sensation emerged. Something inside those spaces became aware of being perceived. The female viewer refused to continue that night. She said every time she tried to focus, she felt a presence pressing back, as if the act of viewing was no longer one-directional. The officers didn't force her, but as she walked away, she paused at the doorway. Her voice barely carried across the room. What if these places aren't just hidden from technology? What if they're hidden because something inside them doesn't want to be found? No one answered. The next morning, a secure message arrived from an overseas station. It contained a single image captured at dawn, grainy, distorted, blurred by fog and atmospheric interference. But in the lower corner, half obscured by rock and shadow. Something appeared that shouldn't have been there. It looked like a doorway carved into the ground. A doorway no satellite ever recorded. A doorway that matched almost perfectly one of the shapes drawn months earlier. During a remote viewing session, the photo came with 3 words typed beneath it: "We aren't alone." And the program, now tangled in threads far beyond its control, moved toward a revelation no one wanted but could no longer avoid. Missing pages and the official Denali doorway in the photograph should have been the proof the unit needed. Solid, physical, undeniable. A cut into the earth where there should have been only rock and soil. When the image was projected onto the briefing room wall, no one looked away. The lines matched what the viewers had drawn long before any camera found it. Same angle, same slope, even the way the surrounding ground dipped, as if the land itself were holding its breath. But proof is a fragile thing inside intelligence work. The more dangerous the implication, the faster certainty begins to dissolve. Almost immediately, the question started. Could the image have been altered? Could the viewers have unconsciously picked up hints from some unlocked piece of data? Was the match really as clean as their fear made it feel? And underneath all of that, if this was real, what did it say about the nature of war? One senior analyst, older than most in the room, finally broke the silence. He had spent a career learning that anything which couldn't be measured was easily dismissed, and often deliberately ignored. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the unease he felt. Even if they're right, he said, not into war the sketches. How do we justify this? We can't put psychic impressions into a briefing for people who never heard of this program. That was the tension that would haunt the unit from that day forward. On one side, the results, moments of precision that never should have been possible. On the other, the system, a rigid structure built on verifiable sources, repeatable methods, and deniability. The operation near the doorway moved slowly. Engineers wanted ground-penetrating radar. Commanders wanted risk assessments. Lawyers wanted clear lines of responsibility. But time was not kind. By the time a small team returned to the valley, the doorway was gone. Rocks had collapsed or been collapsed. Whatever hollow space lay beneath had been sealed. On the monitors back at the base, the new images showed only rubble. No opening, no entry, just a wound in the ground. For the viewers, that absence cut deeper than any confirmation could have. The female subject stared at the photos in silence, jaw clenched. She knew what she had seen in her sessions. She knew what the operative's memories had suggested. Yet the Earth now presented a void where all of that evidence should have intersected. She asked to see the old photograph again, the one that first revealed the doorway. When they projected it on the wall, she stepped closer than the others. Her gaze narrowed. The room fell quiet. Zoom in, she said. Technicians magnified the lower corner. Grain sharpened, then blurred, then sharpened again. At first, there was nothing new. Just shadow, rock, the faint outline of an opening. Then she noticed it not inside the doorway, but just beside it. A sliver of distortion in the image, like a figure caught halfway between frames. Not clear enough to identify, not solid enough to call a person, only a suggestion of form, standing where the viewers had often sensed a presence watching them from. Behind. No one wrote that observation into the official report. It became one more detail passed quietly between people who already had trouble sleeping. In the months that followed, the program entered a strange phase. On paper, it expanded. More sessions, more targets, cases where viewers described foreign sites, naval facilities, weapons tests. A few of those descriptions later aligned with independent intelligence. Most did not. Some were vague, some entirely wrong. The statistics refused to settle into something that could survive a formal review. Yet inside the unit, certain moments refused to be forgotten. A sketch that predicted a structure's unusual shape long before imagery captured it. A session where a viewer described a hostage standing near a window, days before a rescue team stormed a building and found that same window shattered. A sudden, shared impression between two viewers in separate rooms, both insisting that a high-value target had moved. Hours before the first intercepted communication confirmed a relocation. These fragments formed a quiet, uncomfortable truth. The program could not be trusted, and it also could not be entirely dismissed. That ambiguity is where the real pressure began. Outside the unit, whispers of its existence finally reached people with careers built on hard numbers. Skeptical officials demanded oversight. Scientific panels were formed. Files were pulled from locked cabinets and placed on long tables under fluorescent lights. Psychologists, statisticians, and methodologists combed through page after page of drawings, transcripts, coordinates. They circled the same question over and over. Was this anything more than noise? One of those reviewers, a civilian scientist, later spoke privately with an officer from the unit. He admitted the thing that bothered him most wasn't the failures. It was the handful of hits that seemed too sharp to attribute to chance. If he treated them as real, they demanded an explanation that science didn't yet have. If he treated them as coincidence, he had to ignore a level of detail that haunted him. How do you build doctrine on something like that? He asked quietly. You can't. Not safely. As debates raged, the viewers themselves began to fracture under the strain. The male subject, who had first drawn the missing operative, stopped participating. He complained of headaches, intrusive images, and a sense that someone was walking through his thoughts. Medical staff called it stress. He called it intrusion. Eventually, he was transferred out of the program. His exit file was thin. His experiences inside the unit were barely mentioned. The female viewer stayed longer, but each session pulled at her more visibly. Her hands shook after deep viewings. Her sleep fractured into flashes of corridors and doorways she never walked through. She told one officer that sometimes when she closed her eyes, she could not tell whether the images that came were from her assignments or from somewhere that had learned to send them back. That single idea that perception might not be a one-way act never made it into any official analysis. It lived only in the pauses between conversations, in the way people glanced at dark corners when the base went quiet for the night. Then the reviews ended. The program's fate was sealed in meetings far from windowless rooms and underground corridors. A formal conclusion was drawn. Results were inconsistent, often unimpressive, and not reliable enough to guide critical national security decisions. Funding, they said, would be better used elsewhere. The official language was clinical, almost gentle. But inside the unit, the message landed like a verdict. The psychic soldiers, if they could be called that, were told the experiment was over. Some received reassignment. Some left the service entirely. They were instructed not to speak of their work. Most didn't need the reminder. They were already tired of trying to explain things they barely understood themselves. Boxes of files were sealed, labeled, and transferred. Some would later be declassified, years after the Cold War lost its heat. Others vanished into archives no outsider could access. A few seemed to disappear outright, leaving gaps in case numbers and missing references that no one could trace. When, much later, journalists and researchers began to dig through what remained, they found a story that looked simple on the surface. The United States had tested psychic phenomena for intelligence use. The results were uncertain. The projects were shut down. End of file. But buried in those pages, people found oddities. Sessions that described strategic locations with eerie precision. Annotations hinting at operational tasking not explained anywhere else. Redacted segments where names and dates disappeared under black ink at the most inconvenient moments. One memo, stripped of classification long after it mattered, contained a line that seemed almost like a throwaway. It stated that, despite the official termination of funding, some elements may continue limited work under separate authorities. No details, no explanation, just that one sentence. If you've stayed with this story until now, ask yourself something. When a tool is considered unreliable for official use, but occasionally produces results no one can fully explain, does it truly vanish? Or does it slip sideways into quieter programs, deeper compartments, places where oversight thins and deniability grows thicker? The female viewer's name never appears in the public documents. Neither does the operative who heard the whisper in his cell. The photograph of the doorway is absent. The sketch with the blurred figure in the background is nowhere to be found. Yet one retired officer, interviewed years later under a different name, described a final day at the unit that doesn't appear in any official history. He remembered walking past an open office door and seeing a small group gathered around a table. On it lay a folder without a label. Inside, he caught a glimpse of a familiar drawing in a doorway, a valley, and a figure half hidden by a shadow. He paused to look closer, but someone shut the folder before he could. Wrong room, they told him. You're not cleared for this. The unit was already days away from shutdown. No new missions were being assigned. No new experiments were scheduled. So what was still being protected? He never got an answer, and that question leads to the final, most unsettling possibility of all, that the era of psychic soldiers did not end when the files say it did. It simply stepped out of sight into a part of the hidden war we were never meant to see. Could psychic soldiers fight hidden wars? The shutdown was supposed to be the end. Papers signed. Budgets closed. Personnel reassigned. The unit's rooms, once filled with sketches and whispers and quietly held fear, were emptied and scrubbed, their lights switched off for the final time. But endings in intelligence work rarely arrive when they are announced. They arrive later, sometimes years later, sometimes in pieces that never fit together cleanly. And for the people who lived inside the psychic experiments, the closure of the program only deepened the feeling that something unfinished still lived in the shadows they had once tried to explore. The female viewer left the base in silence. She didn't attend the informal farewell gathering. She didn't pack much, just a small bag and the clothes on her back. But on the last night, an officer noticed her walking alone on the empty tarmac, staring into the dark as if waiting for something to surface. He approached her, careful not to startle her. When he asked if she was all right, she said something he replayed in his mind for years afterward. It doesn't stop just because they closed the room. At the time, he didn't understand what she meant. Later, when he learned what happened to her, he realized she may have understood the consequences long before any of them. She moved to a small coastal town far from military life. She found a job that required no clearances, no pressure, no constant threat assessments. But the quiet didn't help. Some nights she woke up gasping, certain she had heard the scraping of metal on stone. Other nights she stayed awake until dawn, afraid to sleep because every dream seemed to end the same way. A corridor, a cold draft, a doorway cut into the ground, and always, just beyond the edge of her vision, that presence she had never been able to name. When she finally agreed to meet with one of the former officers, she looked thinner, but sharper, like someone who had spent years listening to things no one else could hear. They spoke in a small diner near the water. She said she wasn't being followed. She said no one had contacted her. But she didn't say she was safe. One detail troubled the officer more than anything. She claimed the sensation she used to feel only inside viewing sessions had begun appearing without warning in grocery stores, at night on her porch. Once, standing at the shoreline, watching the tide roll in, she swore she felt someone behind her, watching with the same measured attention she remembered from those underground impressions. The officer didn't dismiss her, but he tried to ground the conversation. He asked whether it could be trauma, stress, a psychological imprint of everything she had been through. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. Instead, she asked him a question. When you shut a door, does whatever was on the other side stay put? He couldn't answer. What neither of them knew was that someone else from the unit had been carrying similar shadows. The first male subject, the one who had drawn the missing operative, had also reported sensations that didn't belong to memory or imagination. After his transfer, he struggled to reintegrate into regular assignments. His intuition, once his greatest strength, became something he feared. He refused to participate in any intelligence work involving human sources, saying he could feel too much. His last months in service were quiet, almost eerily so. He submitted no complaints, filed no reports. But when he was found one morning sitting in his car outside his home, holding a sketchbook filled with pages of corridors and doorways, the base psychologist realized something unsettling. His drawings showed details identical to those the female viewer had once described, though the two had barely spoken. Two people, two separate paths, the same imagery haunting them both. Meanwhile, within the intelligence community, something stranger unfolded. Though the program was officially closed, occasional requests began appearing in certain officers' requests for consultation. Independent perception analysis, or intuitive review. None used the old terminology. None referenced remote viewing, but they resembled the same kind of unconventional tasks the psychic unit once performed. Files stamped with unfamiliar clearance levels. Cases routed through obscure channels. Assignments where agents were asked to consider alternative intelligence pathways, and always the same pattern, no paper trail linking back to the original program. Someone, somewhere, had kept the technique alive. One former commander, not known for superstition, stumbled across a bizarre anomaly during a cross-agency review. A report from a counter-terrorism operation mentioned the exact valley where the psychic unit once detected the hidden cache. Analysts had flagged it purely because advanced seismic scans revealed strange echoes beneath the rock, echoes resembling tunnels or chambers. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the structure. It was the comment added by the field team. They claimed their instruments malfunctioned whenever they approached the ground center. Compasses spun, temperature sensors glitched, Audio captured faint vibrations that didn't match any natural pattern. One technician described it as a heartbeat without a body when he wrote his summary. He added a personal note. It was removed during review, but not before someone remembered reading it. It said, "I don't know what's under there, but whatever it is, it knew we were standing above it." The officer who discovered that report sought out the female viewer again. She listened carefully. Then she quietly told him she no longer needed maps or coordinates. The presence she once sensed only in fragmented glimpses now felt broader, as though it existed across multiple places connected by something she couldn't define. She asked the officer a question that shook him more than he admitted. What if the reason we could see them is because they were already looking at us? The question lingered in the air like a cold wind passing through a sealed room. He pressed her for clarity what they meant, who she believed was watching, what the underground structures truly were. She didn't give a definitive answer. Instead, she described something more abstract. Not entities, not ghosts. Something that felt like consciousness without form, intelligence without physical presence. Something that reacted when observed, not out of hostility, but out of recognition. A recognition that felt ancient. The officer left the meeting more unsettled than when he arrived. As the years passed, odd reports accumulated quietly. Unexplained impressions. Intelligence analysts who described sudden insights that mirrored remote viewing methods. Foreign operatives captured with sketches eerily similar to the American files. Underground structures discovered in different regions, all sharing the same architectural impossibility, symmetry, that did not match the surrounding geology. And through every layer of secrecy, one detail pressed itself into the margins of the story. A phrase whispered once in a cold underground cell by a man who wasn't supposed to survive. "You're not supposed to see this." In the final months before complete archival transfer, a junior technician sorting through old uni files found something strange tucked between the unrelated reports, a single sheet of paper, unmarked and unsigned, containing only a handwritten sentence. They did not close the door. No date. No explanation. Just those 6 words. What door? Who didn't close it? And what, exactly, lies on the other side? Those questions still hang in the air, unanswered, waiting in the dark. Because if psychic soldiers ever truly existed not just as experiments, but as operatives, then there is another question far more unsettling. Not whether they were used in hidden wars, but whether the war they touched was far older, far deeper, and still quietly unfolding beneath the world we think we understand.